I talk a lot about cameras and gear and shooting on this channel, as you may know if you've watched a lot of my other videos. But what you may not know, or what I don't talk about all that often, is editing. I do talk about it every once in a while, but I should talk about it more because a good part of my job and what I do is editing. Yes, I love shooting, it's my main passion, but editing is also a big thing for me. And one thing that I think I initially struggled with editing, and I think a lot of people struggle with when they're looking at editing a piece, is how do you know what to cut and what to keep? And that's a really important question because it essentially is editing in a nutshell. You know, that's what you're doing. You're editing the bad stuff out and you're editing or choosing to keep the good stuff in. And while there's a lot of different methods for editing in terms of the type of video that's being created, depending on the genre, depending on the end platform or what it's intended for, there are some general things that you can keep in mind when you get to editing that can save you a lot of time and just be really valuable in terms of determining what you should cut and what you should keep. And the way I like to look at it, my philosophy going into it, is I want to look to cut as much as possible. And that may sound weird, you know, especially if it's like a narrative film or a documentary or something, but you really want to cut as much as possible because chances are it's bad. And why do I say that? Well, because movies, documentaries, music videos, interview videos for corporate video, like any kind of video that you're creating is a condensed, hyper exaggerated version of reality, of the story you're trying to tell or the occasion you're trying to document. And so by cutting out all the excess, you get to keep only the best stuff. And this comes down to stuff like the shots you get. So if a shot is overexposed or underexposed, or it's too shaky, or it's too boring, or the composition's not right, it's out of focus, all the technical problems that can be associated with a shot, a lot of times you'll see people leave that in their edit. And for me, that stuff has to go. Like, it has to go. And I'll say that with the caveat that sometimes you need to keep it, and there are good reasons to keep things sometimes, which I'll get into in a little bit. But right off the bat, if I have to decide whether to cut or to keep something, if there's a technical problem with it or it's not quite right, didn't turn out the way I wanted, it gets cut immediately because chances are there's probably something better that can go in place of it. And when you're looking at making a video of any kind, you want to keep the absolute best. So that also means like actor takes or sound bites from an interview, or you know, the movement of some subject in some B-roll, or whatever it might be. There are a lot of problems or not quite perfect versions of the same thing, and you want to cut all of those. And it sounds really harsh because a lot of people say, wasn't it good enough? And the answer is no, it's not. If you leave that stuff in, you detract from the overall quality of the product. And to get back to the point I was making earlier, sometimes you have to keep it because it's the only soundbite or it's the only shot. And yeah, it's a little out of focus, or yeah, it's a little overexposed. And you have to keep it because there's so much value in that one shot. But if you're looking at a spectrum of, you have 10 different clips that are all kind of the same, wouldn't you want to use the very best one? And that's what I'm always going to default to every single time, is if everything else, there's problems with it, cut all those, keep the best, so that your final video, your final project can be just a montage of the best, absolute best moments. And that's how you make good videos. Very simplistic way to describe it, but essentially that's all you're doing. And a lot of people want to keep more than they cut. And they get tied to shots. They really like how it looks, even though it is, you know, it's a little bit out of focus, or, oh, you know, the actor quite didn't get it right, but it just looks so good, or, you know, we really need this scene in the movie. It's like, no, cut as much as you can because that's going to leave you with the best version after the fact. And it's always a balance. You can't cut everything because then you would have no video. So you have to keep something, but what are you going to keep? Keep the absolute best. And I really do mean it. Those technical errors, or, you know, a boom mic dips in the shot, or you can see someone's mic under their clothes and you don't intend to, or, you know, there's a light that didn't get turned on in the background for that particular shot. All those technical things that cause problems visually, from a sound perspective, from a lighting perspective, all those problems can detract from the experience of watching that video. And if you keep it in, you are risking hurting the entire project for the sake of that one shot. And oftentimes that one shot isn't worth it. You might have a really good shot, composition fantastic, exposure's great, but if it's out of focus and someone's going to notice that it's out of focus, that's probably a worse thing to include than a shot that's, maybe the composition isn't quite right, but at least it's tack sharp and everything's where it's supposed to be and it looks good enough. If something's really messed up, and it's kind of that balancing, what's a worse offense, composition or focus? Can you reframe? Did you shoot at a higher resolution than your final output? What are all the different factors at play? And obviously all that stuff is super specific to your project, and there's no way I could tell you without sitting next to you and saying, keep that, cut that, keep that, cut that. But at the end of the day, what I do is I look and say, okay, is this the absolute best it can be? Oh, it's not? Cut it. And then maybe I'll go back to it and say, okay, well, I have to use it for X, Y, or Z. Always reasons to use things, obviously, but be very picky. Be very picky about what you keep in your project. Again, could be anything. Could be a wedding film, could be a behind the scenes video, but be very intentional. That's a better word. Intentional with your choices. Don't just throw anything in there. Sometimes you're in a rush or you don't want to take the time to sift through everything. You just kind of sprinkle stuff in there. But be very intentional, especially on client paid work. If it's your personal project or your YouTube videos or whatever, not as important. I'm not going to be as picky with it. But if someone's paying you to do a job well, do it well. And that means going through it, picking the absolute best, and then only filling in with the, you got those 10 out of 10 clips, use all the 10 out of 10 clips. Then go to your 9 out of 10, and then go to your 8 out of 10. And hopefully, at that point, you can fill your edit completely, but you might have to go to the 7 out of 10 or the 6 out of 10, that spectrum of quality. You might have to rely on that as backup, as filler. But when in doubt, go for the 10 out of 10, go for the absolute highest quality, and cut everything else.